All right, everybody, I'm back with Israel, Daughter of Egypt, Part 4. I may have to do a Part 5, I'm not sure. But just to get back on track, if this is your first time coming to my page, History Relit, you might want to check out the other parts, the Pillage and Plunder parts, and the Israel, Daughter of Egypt, and the Europa, and whatnot. But I left off in Egypt, Daughter of Israel, Part 3, going over the place named Shechem. There's a couple of scriptures in the Bible that refer to Israel as both a vine out of Egypt and as daughter of Egypt. Now, I stressed the vine out of Egypt aspect because it relates to the god Osiris, originally called Asar. The Greeks call him Osiris, but he's the god of the vine. And I spoke how the expansion of the Egyptian royal lines into Egypt led to the legendary demigod Pelops, being tradition of Pelops being the founder of mainland Greece, and someone who became rich in terms of vineyards and whatnot because he had given his daughters over into wealthy harems of travelers. Which is another aspect of Osiris, who was a traveler. One of whose aspects I've always also talked about the god Min, who was in some scripts said to be Osiris's or Sar's father. He's also the god of procession and the protector of travelers. Now back to nascent Israel and the importance of Shechem. Shechem, for one, in the book of Genesis, is where Abraham first arrived and got the covenant of circumcision. Now, further down the historical and genealogical line, Jacob winds up there and he settles on the border of Shechem. He buys some land from a person named Hazor, and he builds a temple to the Eloah or Elohe, which is, to my mind, the same as the Eloah of modern Ephah religions, which stem back from the Canaanite religion, pantheon, spirit system of El and Elohim. So, Jacob settles on the border and he buys a plot of land and he makes a temple in a town dedicated to the Eloah, and it's called Eloah, Israel. So that's another important aspect of Shechem. And let me see what else happened there. Going forward to the Amarna period under Pharaoh Akhenaten, even before him, probably 300 or 400 years before him, going back to the Ramesside pharaohs, Shechem. There's historical records coming from Shechem. So we have an historic governor of Shechem who has left correspondences with the pharaohs. So when you speak about Egypt and Israel being a vine out of Egypt or daughter of Egypt, and daughter is interpreted as town, so it means it's just given a feminine attribute, to an annex. So Shechem is related to all of this. So the historic mayor or governor of Shechem's name was Labiah. And there is also correspondences between the governor of Jerusalem, which I spoke about in another piece, is actually Jerusalem because it acknowledges the pharaoh as the founder of Jerusalem, which means roughly Horus keeps the peace. So throughout this whole tumultuous period, there was an influx of different barbarian groups, but these sacred, quote unquote, Israelite cities were protectorates of Egypt, hence the rhetoric about being a vine out of, daughter of, etc., etc. So even some of the more obscure towns like Ta Apuat, which is Apuat is an epithet of Anpu, the so-called funerary god. He is the deity or Neteru, angelic intelligence associated with the funerary rites, especially of Osiris. Also concerning Osiris, Shechem is a title or epithet or attribute of Osiris. Shechem refers to a high spiritual attainment, a high amount of authority in terms of spirituality and integrity. It's an honorific title. If you had to compare it, it would be comparable probably to the way Buddhists use the term a Buddha, which is not a personal name but means a great soul, an ascended master. So that is part of what Shechem means. And we know that during the Old Kingdom and probably the first intermediate period, there were pharaohs with the theophoric name Shechem. And more than likely, they were in control of the region also. Now, during the time of Akhenaten, we know that there was a confederacy of all the civilized nations, of which Egypt was the head. This is where the term King of Kings comes from. It was a political, governmental term. It had nothing to do with religion at the first. So Pharaoh was the king, and in that confederacy was Babylon, Assyria, Syria, Canaan, Cyprus, Hatti, and Mitanni. Right? So Pharaoh was the head of this international globalized economy and culture. There's plenty of material culture that verifies this, and it's kind of baffled archaeologists for a while why these Egyptian artifacts were so widespread. But recently they discovered some of these routes, these international routes coming out of Egypt, going all through Syro-Palestine, through Anatolia, through the Cyclades or whatever those islands are in the Aegean. I think there was a group of 12 Greek islands, and then making a round trip coming back. And there's all these scarabs that were found there. The scarab is another symbol of Osiris, but specifically of the god Neteru Khepera, which means transformation. So the gist of it is that Egypt was developing and transforming all these countries, which were at the first, for the most part, just barbarian enclaves. So I speak about in some of the pillage and plunder pieces how these barbarian names began to be later literally considered to be cultural names, like Philistine derives from Palish which is just a term for Indo-European, pillaging, plunder culture. And you can go down the list of, Dan, the tribe of Dan, and the Greek Danaans, the Dinyim. O.R. Gurney is a Hittitologist who relates the term Dinyim to the region of the Danube. So you have all these cultures kind of pouring into coastal Palestine, North Africa, and the Delta, and eventually gaining a foothold. But as I said about Israel, these Israelites, again, what's the term Israel comes from the ancient root Asar El. These Israelites had to be protected by Egypt from the influx of barbarians. I'd have to end this part here, and I'm going to post part 5 shortly.